when you talk about these kinds of identity categorizations, you tend to be talking about things that people are born into, and that there is sort of nothing that they could do to transcend. If you are, born into one of the oppressor categories, there's always going to be a sort of bad baseline that you start with in this ideology. And then if, then at best you can have this moral reformation away from your pre-woke period, and you can become a good ally, which means that, people who've seen the infamous clip from the white women for Harris Zoom call, with that woman who's talking.
I thought it was white men. Oh, is there a white women for Kamala too?
Yeah, the white women actually came first.
Okay.
So
that makes the white dudes one even more cringe, I think.
Yeah. First there was the white women for Kamala Zoom call, and then like a couple days later there was white dudes for Kamala Zoom call. And
but the white dudes probably said the same idea louder and said that it was their idea and got the credit for the Zoom calls. See, Alex, you thought it was the white dudes.
See, there you go. There you go.
Yeah,
taking credit for the white women's
internalized
effort.
misogyny.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Thanks, Alex.
Milan ou Tripoli, Vilnius ou Benghazi, Paris, Moscou, on fait le bunga, bunga. Bangkok ou Bogota, Le Caire ou Jakarta, Gustavia, on fait le bunga, bunga. Stockholm ou Monaco, ou Montevideo, Oslo, Tokyo, on fait le bunga, bunga.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to BungaCast, the global politics podcast at the end of history. I'm Alex Hochuli in São Paulo, Brazil. This podcast is also George Hoare in London, and some other people who aren't here today, but who is here today. Very delighted to have Ben Burgis on the podcast. Ben, why don't actually you introduce yourself? Because I forgot how you would like to be introduced. So why don't you do it yourself?
Sure. So I am coming in from Rosarito, Mexico, so essentially the greater San Diego metropolitan area. And I am a columnist for Jackman Magazine and the host of a show called Give Them an Argument.
Excellent. Again, people who are listening to this aren't familiar with Ben's work. We'll link to it all in the show notes, and you should definitely go and check it out. What we're going to actually be discussing today is questions of, political diagonalism, which doesn't tell you anything, I think, most likely just in that term. Although I do think it is a useful term. We're going to get onto that. This actually is an episode about Ben's article in Damage, which has just recently come out, called Left Identitarianism is Also a Mirror World, which is a review of Naomi Klein's book, Doppelganger, and a discussion of the two Naomis. If you're familiar with the two Naomis, Naomi Klein and Naomi Wolf, maybe you yourself, listener, have got those two confused in the past. I know I have. But this is an episode in association, in partnership with Damage. We're partnered with Damage Magazine. Subscribers to this podcast, if you're listening to the free section of this show and you would like to subscribe to BungaCast, if you do that, you'll also get a free digital subscription to Damage Magazine, which I think is very much worth your while, worth your dollar or other currency that you may be using wherever you may be. Right. So, Ben and George, for all of us, really, when did you first encounter Naomi Klein? Because she is someone who, I think for our generation, if we can speak in those terms, has been around the whole time. She's always been there. She's kind of the wallpaper. She is, I think, maybe the most kind of mainstream left figure there is in terms of, or someone who's able to condense the most kind of modal left positions around, I think. But guys, when did you first encounter Naomi Klein, Ben?
I'm not sure, actually, which probably speaks to your point. So I could definitely remember seeing Naomi Klein speak at the People's Summit in 2016 in Chicago. but I definitely heard the name many years before that. I was probably at least vaguely aware of No Logo. And to your point earlier, I suspect that probably during, let's say, the Occupy Wall Street era, or, around the time that, like the people started talking about Julian Assange, for example, that I probably did sometimes confuse Naomi Klein with Naomi Wolf, which is shockingly easy to do. I caught it before I submitted it, but I actually did in one sentence. I actually mixed up the two names in one sentence in the review originally.
So I think for me, Alex, we were talking about this before recording, but No Logo was probably the first kind of politics book that I read, or first kind of book on contemporary politics. I remember buying it from FOP, which British listeners might remember, this now defunct record. I might have one or two locations left, but yeah, now defunct record store. So yeah, it was, I guess I was pretty like, wow, this is cool, and Radiohead like this book as well, and so yeah, this must be quite trendy. But then I think some of the more recent books I haven't. In fact, I should just be straightforward. I haven't read anything of hers after No Logo, so this is why it was good to read Ben's review and to be discussing her most recent book, because I think you're right, Alex. There are a few writers who really represent, who've been prominent. I mean, it's 25 years ago, No Logo. Now, so she's been a prominent kind of figure on the left for a quarter of a century, and I think has pretty well tracked what are some of the mainstream kind of American, I think she's Canadian, but yeah, mainstream American kind of left positions. So I think for that reason, a kind of person who's worthy of kind of reading and taking seriously because of what she represents.
Definitely. I think she's probably quite influential, but also quite reflective of the general kind of left tendencies of the 21st century. I think people will associate her still as being probably the lead spokesperson for the anti-globalization or alter-globalization movement and that whole moment, which is really of the mid-90s to the early 2000s. But actually, if we look at the way that her book on disaster capitalism is referenced so widely, whose name just escapes me, which makes me sound like an idiot because I've just said it's referenced really widely. And
Shock doctrine.
The shock doctrine. Thank you. I think it does encapsulate something about, I think at a deep philosophical level, what the contemporary left thinks and sees. And I think she's the perfect avatar of, for good and for evil, the avatar of 21st century leftism. And I think that it particularly in her kind of green environmental sort of tendencies, without being very deep green, a kind of sense of capitalism being this giant monster which is destroying things, and also certain more kind of I guess sensitivity towards identity and some indigeneity, but without being too far on that line either. Anyway, I think some of this will come out as we go through the discussion of Ben's review of the book. Just briefly, because we have to talk about the other Naomi, because this book, I think, Ben, why don't you tell us what's in this book? What's its kind of proposal?
Yeah. So the takeoff point for the book is Naomi Klein's frustration with, as we were saying earlier, constantly being confused with the other Naomi, Naomi Wolf. And I remember at one point years ago, Jeet here saying, it's guys, it's not that uncommon a name. You should be able to handle two Naomi's. Like at this point, this just feels like anti-Semitism that these women, you can't differentiate them. But that differentiation, of course, became kind of more urgent for Klein as Wolf really went off the deep end. And Naomi Wolf is also somebody who, I should say, like, I mean, I remember being vaguely aware of who that was even when I was a teenager in the, like late 90s. But I probably at various points over the years, I was like, wait a second, is that the same person who? I don't know. Right. Because, Naomi Wolf was originally kind of the, in a lot of ways, I think like sort of the most mainstream of mainstream feminists, that she was, famous for a book about beauty standards. That was kind of what she originally, broke through with. And, she was a big enough figure that she was like a consultant to the Gore Lieberman campaign in 2000. And by, the Occupy Wall Street era, she was doing a much more robustly left-wing sort of turn compared to those origins. I would argue in a fairly superficial way. Like if you actually look at like what she was saying, I certainly don't think there was ever much in the way of like lefty economic analysis or anything like that. But I think that she was worried to some extent about concentrated power and authoritarianism, and these things came out in fairly left ways in the early 2010s, with her sympathy for Occupy Wall Street, her advocacy for free and Julian Assange, and even at one point, I think advocacy for Palestinians, during the 2014 bombing of Gaza. But I think that she's like, I think in some ways it's like a much less sort of interested or credible version of something like the Glenn Greenwald progression. Because, I think that, Glenn, for all my disagreements with him, is just probably a much smarter person. But I think that Naomi Wolf, really went from, this kind of like vague populist anti-authoritarianism, left-coded edition, to vague populist anti-authoritarianism, right-coded edition. And really, as I'm sure we'll get into, it was the COVID pandemic, that really drove that transformation more than anything else. So that there were also some other things going on with her personal trajectory. And as Naomi Wolf basically got crazier and crazier over the course of COVID, I think that probably Naomi Klein was more frustrated by this confusion. And I know everything I've said so far makes it sound like, well, hold on, that's is kind of a cute basis for an article, I guess, right? But it's like is there really a whole book in
Right.
in this? And that's fair, right? But I actually think, and I really don't want this to get lost, because obviously in certain respects it's a very critical review, but I actually think it's a good book. I really would recommend that people read it. And I think that she, I think Naomi Klein, I say this at the beginning of the review, I think that, I think she's a very good writer. I think that really comes out in all the quotes in the review. Like every time I was looking up the exact phrasing so I could quote something, I was always like, oh, wow, that's really good, right? Like that's a good line. I think she's certainly a meticulous researcher. And I actually think that, again, like, even if I think there are problems with her interpretation of it, I think there's a sort of overall, humane and egalitarian, value system that's guided everything that in most ways is quite admirable. And she doesn't it's not just like this sort of strange memoir about being mixed up with this person, right? I mean, that's the jumping off point. But I think she's using it to explore some much more interesting subjects. And there are points in the book where she casts a very wide net, and sort of how closely thematically everything she covers is really related to this is another question. Because, I think looked at in the right light, just about anything could be called a shadow or a mirror of anything else.
But
you
yeah,
know,
I do think it's a kind of appealing starting point, though. Somebody who shares your name, and how your political trajectory could have differed from theirs, and what kind of relief that throws probably your own politics into as well. I guess I wanted to ask the two of you, because
yeah.
I don't know I don't really know anybody else with the same name as me, but Alex, we
I
have
was going to
had
do this. I was going
we've
to ask
had
this. Yeah.
we've
Okay.
had a
Go.
lot of Alexes on the podcast. And I don't know if either of you ever get confused for other
I
people.
actually don't, which is funny because look, I mean, as is noted in the book and the review, the historical ethnic composition of the left being what it's been, it's absolutely lousy with Bens, right? I mean, there are probably thousands of left wing writers named Ben, and to the best of my knowledge, I've never been confused with any of them.
Well, if you had to choose one, right? So, like, I'm trying to think of an Alex that I'm getting confused. Like, I'm obviously getting confused with Alex Jones, quite evidently. No, I don't know. Or maybe you've had to go for something more, kind of Central
Well,
European sounding, like Axel Honneth or something, which is like, I don't know.
I don't think anyone's confusing you for Axel Honneth.
No, I know, but I mean,
No
like, I'm
offense.
choosing, right? Like, it's not like, I don't think, I'm
Yeah.
not saying the public is getting
So,
confused.
so true story. 2 years ago and change, I was on the Joe Rogan show, and before we started recording, um, Rogan was talking to me and like an employee of the show who was hanging around, and he was at this point he was just kind of talking to the employee, and they were talking about Jeffrey Epstein. And he said, it's funny. Alex always used to tell me there's this island where rich pedophiles would take people, and I was just like, it's Alex being Alex. I think it took me a full 30 seconds of listening to this to like identify which Alex he had in mind. It's like, oh wow, okay.
Not
So,
our Alex, a different
No, I don't
Alex.
believe so. No.
Yeah, because I mean the idea of a doppelganger, as far as I understand it, right, is if you meet your doppelganger in German, in the kind of German folktale kind of world, right, this means you're going to die, and it's somebody who looks. I think this is right. Somebody who looks exactly like the same as you, and it's a very eerie kind of unseemly experience, because you see your kind of yourself as other people see you, and it's this kind of like omen that's bad things are going to happen. Does she kind of lean into this at all and sort of say, well, I've seen my doppelganger, and this is this means it's a bad omen for me?
Yeah, she certainly never says so explicitly, but I suppose that there's the kind of anxiety underlying some of her talk about this does almost suggest that. But
does that mean that like kind of right coded conspiracy theorizing will kill off left liberalism or something? Would that be?
I mean, I think that's the real.
If only, yeah.
I mean, yeah. So I mean, really, like that's where I think it gets more interesting, because I mean, I mentioned at the beginning that when I found out about this talk, because I found out about the book because I was at this conference last year, and she was giving like a talk about it, right? It had like just come out, or was just about to come out, and the friend who suggested it, right? Actually, I was going to meet him there, but then I later, he told me at the hotel bar he'd like skipped out after a few minutes because the opening premise, kind of as we described it, sounded gimmicky and ridiculous to him. But I actually think it's way more interesting than it might have sounded to him, because it's like, yeah, it's like Alex was suggesting just now, right? The sort of the more interesting doppelganger besides this confusion, which is a fairly funny confusion, like actually in many ways, and like just as a literary device, it actually does kind of work in a weird way. Like at the time, Naomi Klein was and is still married to this filmmaker whose first name is Avi, film producer, and And at the time, Naomi Wolf was dating a film producer named Avi, right? Like there are all these really weird coincidences built up like that. But yeah, she, like she's using this as a jumping off point to explore. I mean, the real sort of doppelganger is, Naomi Wolfism, right? Versus Naomi Kleinism, right? Like exactly like Alex was just kind of suggested, right? That there's this kind of conspiratorial, right wing faux populism that works as this kind of collective doppelganger of the left. Uh, Certainly it hits a lot of the same rhetorical notes, while filling them with completely different substantive content. And also I should say, right, I think that part of what made the part of the talk that I was there for interested enough that I actually ended up reading the book. And like most of Naomi Klein's book, this thing's a doorstopper, right? It's giant. Is that she was making the point that it's like, oh, look, it's the sort of weaknesses and blind spots of the left that give this doppelganger, sort of room to grow, right? That the sort of issues that we neglect or that we sort of accept simplified narratives about, and I guess she's mostly directing this in a sort of unclear way, as it's unclear how much of a mea culpa there is here for like the left, right, to the extent that there is such a thing right now, right, and how much she's just kind of talking about libs, right, so the extent to which this is a self-critique or directed outward, at this other faction, but she does say, I think, some interesting and worthwhile stuff about this, like that. Okay, it's the way the sort of insanity that somebody like Naomi Wolf would spin about vaccine passports and how they're I don't know, they're gonna there's some sort of cybernetic something or other that's going to control your brain from the vaccine passport or whatever, right? Like that's all ridiculous. But there is a sort of bundle of anxieties about, big tech and social control and censorship and all of that stuff that very often people in a lefty liberally kind of space are very dismissive of, oftentimes because of this bad cycle where it's, where when the sort of resurgent populist right takes hold of an issue, then it sort of toxifies it by association and they don't want to touch it.
Yeah. I mean, so that we don't kind of bury the lead too much, you've already kind of said what this is about, what your review is about, and what the book is about, and also to a certain extent what your critique of the book is, which is that there's a political transvestitism going on where kind of the right is adopting certain lefty clothes, which Naomi Klein wants to complain about, that the right is adopting kind of seemingly radical, seemingly populist or popularist positions, which truly belong to the left in her view. And conversely, and this is a point that you maybe more put across, Ben, is that to a certain extent the left itself has adopted ideas which are conservative, I guess, or aren't universalist or aren't humanist, or in some way go against what the left's own kind of modern traditions have been. I mean, by modern, I mean from from the 19th century onwards.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So again, I think it's an interesting book. I think she gets a lot of stuff right, and pretty much what we've been talking about is the stuff that I think she more or less gets right. But I think this actually goes back to one of the first things you guys were saying, which is that Naomi Klein in a lot of ways really is just sort of the, I don't know, platonic ideal of like kind of maybe a very smart and well expressed version of, but like a, I don't know, median left thought, right? That sort of like this kind of like left of liberalism energy as it's existed from the anti-globalization movement up through Bernie, et cetera, right? That this is that she's sort of this very representative avatar of that, for good or bad. And I do think some of the bad creeps into the book. So she spent all this time talking about how there's the trajectory that's represented by Wolf, and we don't need to spend a lot more time on Wolf, but just really briefly on her, I will say, like, she one that it would be a shame to go this whole time talking about this without mentioning Wolf's sort of big fall from grace a couple years, like 2000 or 2018, 2019, something like that. She had come out with a book that it infamously came out sort of mid radio interview, that the basic research for the book had been badly mangled, that she was looking at like Victorian legal records, and every time she came on the phrase death recorded, she interpreted that as like a execution had taken place, which is a natural interpretation if you didn't know, but also something has gone badly wrong if you've actually gone to print without consulting somebody who knows more about this, and it turns out that in these documents that actually, like, this is a sort of quirk of British law in this period, that it actually means the opposite, right? That the death penalty was excused. These people weren't executed, and so it's an incredibly painful clip to listen to, right? I mean, and basically anybody who's a writer just like have this horrible sympathetic cringe as they're listening to this, because this has got to be the writerly equivalent of like I don't know, you're in the exam room in your underwear, and you didn't know that the final was today, et cetera, right? It's just
that makes me more sympathetic to Naomi Wolf, because it's you don't know what stupid mistake you've made until you've made it, and I don't want my stupid mistake like that to be revealed during a radio interview. At least if it was doing a podcast episode, you could edit it out at the end. But if it's live radio, shit, you're on the hook for that one.
Exactly.
Sorry.
No, totally, right. So absolutely, like I don't trust anybody who doesn't feel bad for her, when they're hearing this story. It does maybe say something about the research standards, which become more relevant as she responds to COVID by becoming really the most deranged kind of conspiracy theorist. She's like to the point of like, I mean, she was classic Naomi Wolf tweets about COVID, or that, children have, lost the ability to smile because they're wearing masks, the vaccine, had nanoparticles that might be able to travel back in time, that the vaccine was a software platform that could experience updates, that she posted something about she was in Dublin and the air felt different because they didn't have 5G. They actually had for years. She really, really, really lost her mind in this period. And I think there's a cycle that happens with a lot of figures like this. She's sort of an extreme case where they've alienated the people they used to talk to, and then they spend a lot of time with the people who will still talk to them. And humans being what they are, little by little, they're influenced by the views of the people who will still talk to them. So in Naomi Wolf's case, that's like Steve Bannon, who she starts to become a very regular feature on Steve, on Steve Bannon's podcast. So, that's Klein's point. But it does seem to me that Klein, being this kind of avatar of like, representative 21st century leftism, that there's stuff that sneaks into the book that, exactly like Alex was saying, is, I think, representative of ideas that the left has taken on really, I think going back to like the Vietnam era, but I mean, especially, but I think in certain respects, more in the 21st century, that, I don't want to necessarily say, like, I don't want to idealize, oh, here was this period of the past where the left got everything right. Like, I actually don't think that's like a terribly useful way to frame this, right? I think that, I think the whole Stalin thing was pretty bad, for example, right? Mistakes were made.
Yeah, that whole Stalin. Yeah, that's an episode which, we should try not to repeat that one, for example. Yeah. Hi there, friends. This is the end of a sample from an episode available only to subscribers at patreon.com/bungacast. For $7 a month, subscribers get at least 4 original exclusive episodes a month, featuring Alex, George, and Phil, as well as our regular contributors, Alex Gurovich, Amberly Frost, Catherine New, and Lee Phillips. We've got episodes on current affairs, extended interviews, exclusive episodes on theory, history, culture, docuseries, analyses of film, and our responses to listeners' questions and criticisms. And for $12 a month, you also get access to the very special BungaCast Reading Club, where we present the key books and essays necessary for understanding the world today, how we got here, and where we might be going. Of course, if you just want to try us out, there's also a $3 entry tier giving you 1 exclusive episode a month. We do hope you'll join us. These are turbulent times, and ideologically confused ones as well. We tried to find some political clarity so that we might move beyond the age of bunga bunga.
Dakar ou Brasilia, Koweït, Hong Kong, on fait le bout.